Build 42 has finally landed on the stable branch, and a lot has changed since Build 41. So in this video, I'll be doing a quick recap on exactly what's changed, focusing on the big stuff. So if you haven't played on stable, you'll still be ready to get started with your best foot forward. Okay, we're getting started with one of the most immediately noticeable things about Build 42, and that's the changes to the playable map space. Firstly, there are several new towns and points of interest around Kentucky, the majority of which are located in the western region. This includes Echo Creek, a rural town with an abundance of remote farmhouses, Irvington, a much more built-up urban area with its own raceway, Ekron, a farming town on the western border, and Brandenburg, the site of a new prison and a recent tornado that has damaged multiple buildings in the area. There's also the vacation homes of Dark Wallow Lake, but this is way off to the south of the map, not too far from Rosewood and March Ridge. These new towns aren't available as spawn points in default modes. However, if you use the custom Sandbox settings, you'll actually be able to set your spawn to any of these new areas and check out something different right from the get-go. New points of interest include the sprawling Louisville Airport just to the east of the big city, historic Coalfield, the western-themed tourist town, and the incredibly creepy abandoned boarding school, just to name a few. There are a ton of really cool locations to discover in Build 42, but I don't want to spoil them all for you, so consider this encouragement to get out there and visit the areas you haven't been to before, because there might just be something worth finding. Something you may also notice almost as soon as you start your first playthrough is that existing map areas have received a bit of a facelift. Now, this is something that even players that have kept up to date with the unstable branch will want to know about, because some of these improvements are very recent indeed, as in a couple of days before this video went live. We had already seen improvements to towns like Muldraw, where popular locations like the Rusty Rifle and Cortman Medical had been completely reworked, but that has now been expanded to places like Rosewood, Riverside, and more locations thanks to the work of the mapping team. On that note, if you missed my interview with Ayrton, the art director for Project Zomboid, there's a really good section in there where we talk about the map glow up and what's coming next for Nox Country, so I definitely recommend giving that video a quick look if you missed it. New and improved map spaces isn't where the devs have stopped though. We've also seen the implementation of basements, something that I found has seriously improved the viability of certain locations as potential safe houses. Now, there are two different types of basements in Project Zomboid. There's the randomly allocated ones that are attached to a variety of buildings, mostly residential in nature, coming in different shapes and sizes. And then there's the static ones that will always be present on the map, always look the same, and they are primarily attached to big points of interest like, say, the Muldraw police station's new sublevels. This brings me nicely into the changes to elevation in Build 42. Not only do we have basements, you can actually proceed several levels underground in some cases, and especially in Louisville, you'll now find skyscrapers that extend far above the player's visual range, covering over 20 levels in some places. Last of the features that will affect your surroundings is a dramatic change to lighting. In Build 41, light was a much more solid entity with no variation. Either an area was dark or it wasn't. In Build 42, light seeps through open doorways and curtains to create a more realistic and immersive feeling. Street lamps have also seen changes, which serves to make venturing out in the late hours a bit of a different experience thanks to this new ambience that's been created. Okay, moving away now from how Kentucky itself has changed and instead into how the gameplay might feel different. First up is muscle strain. This is a new mechanic to Build 42 aimed at slowing things down in the early stages and stopping veteran players from immediately being a zombie killing machine. Muscle strain was quite a controversial addition when it first came to the unstable branch, but the default rate at which it is gained has since been reduced and is thus much easier to manage. For newcomers, you'll just need to keep in mind that you'll only be able to fight for a limited time before having to do something else. You can keep track of muscle strain on the character health panel, or just keep an eye out for the pain moodle appearing during combat as a warning sign for when to stop. You can help lessen the effects of muscle strain by pushing over zombies instead of hitting them with a weapon, then mixing in frequent use of the stomp. This will direct some of the muscle strain to your legs instead. Basically, just spreading the effects of muscle strain to different limbs can help lessen the effects of it during combat. You may also notice muscle strain when completing multiple manual labor activities in quick succession or when carrying too much weight. So remember to take frequent breaks, rest, and try to plan out some less intensive activities in between all the hard work. From personal experience, muscle strain is a bit of an adjustment at first, but give it some time before you throw it out altogether. I found after a couple of hours it was something that felt a lot more natural. That said, if you try the new build and you're really just not getting on with muscle strain at all, it can be changed in the Sandbox settings. In a similar vein, it's also worth knowing about the new Discomfort feature. Protective clothing or items that would restrict your movement in some way now make your character uncomfortable if worn for a prolonged period of time, which you'll see represented by a new Moodle. This includes items like knee pads, bulletproof vests, or gas masks. Discomfort can also come from being soaked by rainfall or extreme weather conditions. Discomfort makes your character unhappy, which in turn makes timed actions take much longer, so avoid it wherever you can. Now personally, I choose to turn off discomfort altogether in the Sandbox settings, but that is totally optional and you should try it for yourself before making a decision. And very quickly, just while we're talking about Moodles, there is now a noxious smell Moodle that represents the odor being caused by zombie corpses. The first stage of this Moodle is nothing to worry about, but anything above that and you'll want to try and move out of the area or get rid of some of the corpses that are stinking up the place. If you don't, your character will begin to get sick and suffer detrimental effects to their health. You'll notice when burying the dead that they are no longer simply items that sit in your inventory either. There are now full animations for dragging zombies, burying them in graves, or even throwing them out of a window. Oh, and there's now ragdolls too, although this only kicks in by default with firearms, vehicle collisions, or explosive devices. Next, we're looking at Sandbox settings, which is another area that has seen significant updates. Namely, the difficulty presets that you will be used to from build 41 have been reworked. While the names might look different, most of them are very similar to the previous versions, and while there are tweaks under the hood, I don't think many players will notice this in practice. The exception is Extinction. This new game mode is designed to challenge even the most seasoned of Project Zomboid veterans, and it is safe to say that it is absolutely not fair. There is a small percentage of sprinters in this mode, zombies will spawn much closer to your spawn house, and alarms will go off almost instantly, making for a chaotic start that you may need to try a few times before you survive the opening stages. Extinction mode is something that everyone needs to try at least once. It is punishing and incredibly difficult, and it also gave me some of the best experiences that I've ever had in Project Zomboid to date. And if you want to see my first runs on Extinction, we actually made them into a video not too long ago. Now, the next big thing that I want to talk about is the changes to crafting in Build 42. This is without a doubt one of the single largest implementations that you'll see with this new version, because a full crafting network has been created, featuring multiple new workbenches, new skills you won't be familiar with like pottery and carving, and some new skill books to go along with them. There is now a crafting menu and a building menu, separating construction of items like walls into a separate area. Now, I won't lie to you, the new system is confusing at the best of times, and it's only going to get worse in that regard as more changes come to the game aimed at extending long-term progression. Improvements have been made to the UI, but I still think it's got a long way to go. Further crafting recipes are assigned uniquely to benches with certain skills, so you'll need to craft whatever workstations are relevant to the skills that you are currently progressing. Thankfully, some of the more difficult skills to level from Build 41, such as aiming and reloading, now have new skill books, so they're nowhere near as difficult to grind as they were previously. These books can be rare though, and are often found in the same places that you would find the materials associated with the skill itself. So for aiming and reloading books, that could be gun stores, firing ranges, or military locations. The most useful new skill book though, in my opinion, is the maintenance skill, helping to make your melee weapons last much longer in combat even with repeated use. While we're touching on melee weapons as well, a handy little tip for Build 42, when a weapon breaks, you often keep the head of the weapon itself. This happens with garden forks, hammers, all sorts of things. This then allows you to use the new crafting crafting system and simply replace the handle, effectively forming a new weapon with the old head that is still intact. Now, relevant to crafting, it's also worth noting that certain objects in the environment have become interactable in Build 42, taking cues from the popular Common Sense mod. This means you can pick up a rock as an early weapon, pick up a log straight off the ground if you haven't found an axe to cut down a tree yet, and much more. Oh, and as a final tip, you can now pull curtains from windows and use a new crafting recipe to turn it into a sheet sling bag when you're just getting started with your playthrough. Now, one of the brand new skills in Build 42 is Animal Care, and that's relevant here because another of the new additions with this version was a wide range of animals, both domestic and wild. Livestock animals come in the form of cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, and turkeys, whereas wild animals include both larger game such as roaming herds of deer that you can find out in the woods in most cases, or smaller animals like rabbits, raccoons, and rats. You can create animal zones to claim livestock as your own that you'd like to breed or use for meat and other produce, which is incredibly useful if you're staying in one area and are able to ensure your animals don't go hungry. Chickens are a fantastic source of food, for example, because they lay eggs on a regular basis all year round. On the trapping side of things, you can now actually catch live animals in your traps on occasion, and I know many players have been using this feature to start small rabbit farms because they breed so quickly and provide a good source of meat. Some animals are mostly there for decoration. You'll often see rats in basements or buildings that have fallen into a state of disrepair, and sometimes even spiders scattering away from you as you approach. So far, we haven't seen any rideable horses added to Build 42, except through the use of mods, but fingers crossed that's something we can expect in the future. Now, while we're touching on new skills, I should mention that fishing has also seen a significant revamp in Build 42. Instead of allowing you to stand in one spot for a long time and go AFK while your character tries to secure dinner, there's now an interactive minigame that makes fishing a bit more involved. There's new animations, new bait types, a whole range of fish to catch, and new mechanics to learn. Alongside new and updated skills, there's also been some changes and new additions to the occupations and traits selection screen. Making our way from left to right, you'll notice there are now several new occupations that weren't present in Build 41. Most of these are aimed at providing benefits for associated features that are new to Build 42, like, for example, the Rancher, that has 4 extra levels in animal care and 3 levels in butchering. The occupations in general have all seen a bit of a rework since Build 41, focused on making them a bit more worthwhile in all cases, and thus a bit more balanced too. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely still some favorites, but it's nowhere near as clear-cut as it was before in Build 41. There are some new traits in Build 42, as well as some of the existing traits seeing some point adjustments. One big change is to the Smoker trait, for example, that is now no longer the freebie that it once was, giving your character a smoker's cough that can attract nearby Zeds and only gives you 3 points to spend instead of the previous 4 points that it was worth on Build 41. A couple of examples of new traits include Tinkerer, that gives you +1 maintenance for a 4-point cost, and Target Shooter, that provides +1 to the aiming skill for a 5-point cost. My recommendation here would simply be to take this as an opportunity to try out new builds and see what works best for you. Now, we're going back to Firearms for a minute here because the way in which they actually function has received big changes between the two builds. It's now not only a simple case of whether you hit or miss. If anything, you're a lot more likely to hit with guns at lower levels than you were previously, but the damage caused is a calculation of your aiming skill, distance to the target, and where your crosshair is actually placed, with limb-specific damage coming into play. So if you take the time to place your cursor over a zombie's head, you will always see more kill shots as a result. This essentially means that aiming is not just RNG anymore. There is a skill element to it, and because you almost always hit the target in some capacity, even at the lower levels, you gain more experience, making the aiming skill much easier to level than it was previously when using anything outside of a shotgun. Now, the shotgun is no longer the street-sweeping zombie killer that it was before, but it does feel relatively balanced even at lower levels and nets you a good chunk of experience for your time. I personally prefer to use the quieter weapons in the early stages like the SN38 revolver, which won't suffer from a jam, or the M9 pistol since the ammo is frequent and it's easy to use without drawing a crowd. Lastly, just quickly before we move on, it's worth me mentioning that there are a handful of new firearms to find find, such as the JS3T tactical shotgun, the JS14 rifle, and the Trapper carbine. Okay, so I think that just about covers all of the big changes that you need to know about before jumping into Build 42 for the first time. Obviously, there's been a lot of smaller changes during the time Project Zomboid was in its most recent unstable phase, but I think this covers the important bits while leaving out all of the other fluff. If you want some tips and tricks for surviving Build 42, I did a video on this quite a while ago that has racked up over 750,000 views to date, and most of the info you'll get is still relevant to the most recent version. If you have any questions about Build 42 in general, please feel free to ask me down in the comments. And lastly, I'd like to mention we're running a discount on my Patreon right now for the release week of Build 42, where you can get access to our whitelisted Project Zomboid multiplayer server and join our community in a new player-friendly PvE setting. There's a link for that down in the description, and as always, thanks for watching. I will see you all in the next one.